She was sold at 11. At 13, married off like property. By 19, she watched her husband murdered by her own brother. And through it all, the man orchestrating her every move wore the robes of the Pope. This isn't fiction. This is the story of Lucrezia Borgia. Rome, 1480. Behind the marbled churches and masterpieces of Renaissance Italy, corruption simmered like a fever under silk robes. The Catholic Church, meant to be a beacon of morality, had become a marketplace for power. And no family played the game more ruthlessly than the Borgias. Lucrezia was born illegitimate, the daughter of Rodrigo Borgia, a powerful cardinal, and his longtime mistress, Vanozza. In a world where bastard children were hidden or discarded, Rodrigo did the opposite. He groomed Lucrezia as his greatest political weapon. From infancy, she was raised not for love, but for leverage. Her beauty, intelligence, and even her virginity were assets to be traded. While other children learned prayers and etiquette, Lucrezia was learning to navigate ambition in a city where poison was a political tool and betrayal a daily ritual. Rome whispered of scandals in candlelit corners, but in the Borgia household, they were policy. Rodrigo would become Pope Alexander VI, arguably the most corrupt man to ever wear the Triple Crown. His rise to power was bought, not blessed, and with that, Lucrezia's childhood ended. Lucrezia's first marriage at the age of 13 to Giovanni Sforza was orchestrated with the cold precision of a military campaign. The ceremony, held in the Vatican itself, was more a political merger than a wedding. Contemporary accounts depict the 12-year-old bride as strikingly beautiful, with golden hair and an ethereal grace that concealed an already developing, calculating mind behind an innocent facade. But beauty in the Borgia world was merely another weapon, and Lucrezia was taught to wield it with deadly effectiveness. The marital bed itself became a stage for familial perversions. Reports from the time suggest that Pope Alexander VI demanded detailed accounts of the wedding night, displaying an unhealthy interest in his daughter's sexual initiation. Some witnesses went further, claiming the Pope insisted on being present during the young couple's intimate moments, though these accounts remain controversial. What is undeniable is that Lucrezia's privacy, dignity, and innocence were sacrificed to her father's obsession with control. Giovanni Sforza, Lucrezia's first husband, later made accusations that haunted her for centuries. When the political alliance he represented became inconvenient, the Pope secured an annulment of the marriage. In retaliation, Sforza publicly claimed that the Borgias sought to eliminate him to continue their incestuous relationship with Lucrezia unimpeded. Whether driven by malice or truth, these accusations found fertile ground in the poisonous atmosphere of Renaissance gossip, where the Borgias' real crimes made even the most outlandish rumors plausible. But the scandal of annulment wasn't the end. It was just a pause in a much darker descent. As the public reeled from claims of non-consummation, Giovanni Sforza struck back. Humiliated and cast aside, he accused the Borgias of incest. His words were venomous. Pope Alexander, he claimed, wanted him out of the way to continue a relationship with Lucrezia himself. Was it slander? Perhaps. But in Renaissance Rome, where truth bent easily under power, such rumors found eager listeners. The Borgias were already infamous for their excesses, orgies in papal apartments, a murder for politics, bribery as routine. So when someone said the Pope was sleeping with his daughter, people didn't scoff. They leaned in closer. At the heart of it all was Lucrezia. She said nothing. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. Her brother Cesare Borgia, once a cardinal, now a rising political enforcer, stepped into the vacuum left by Sforza. If Alexander was driven by lust and power, Cesare operated on something colder. He was brilliant, ambitious, and dangerously obsessed, with control, with violence, and, many believed, with Lucrezia. Unlike her first husband, Cesare didn't bother with ceremony. His influence over her life was absolute. Witnesses spoke of his violent jealousy toward any man who approached her, of strange disappearances, and of a mysterious infant who appeared in the Vatican household, an infans Romanus, whose parentage was deliberately blurred. Was he Cesare's son? The Pope's? And who was the mother? No one dared to ask aloud. Lucrezia's life had become a storm of secrets. Every move she made was watched, every breath turned into speculation. And yet, she endured, not as a schemer, not as a villain, but as a young woman boxed in by men who saw her as an object to be used, discarded, or locked away. She was no longer a child, but she had not yet escaped. At 17, Lucrezia entered her second marriage, this time to Alfonso of Aragon, a young noble of royal blood, and for a moment a source of something she'd never known: affection. By all accounts, Alfonso was different. The match, though still political, allowed Lucrezia a flicker of hope. The two seemed genuinely close. She bore him a son, Rodrigo. For a time, she smiled in public again. There were whispers, quiet ones, that she might finally be free of the Vatican's grip. But the Borgias had made too many enemies, and happiness in their world was dangerous. Cesare, now a commander of papal armies and carving out a bloody power base across Italy, saw Alfonso not as a husband, but as a threat. Whether out of politics or something more personal, Cesare made his decision. In the summer of 1500, Alfonso was attacked just outside St. Peter's Basilica, stabbed multiple times, left bleeding on the Vatican steps. Somehow, he survived. Lucrezia was frantic. She nursed him herself, refused to leave his side, prepared his food by hand in fear of poison. But love alone couldn't protect him. Weeks later, Cesare entered the sick room with his men. Lucrezia and her sister-in-law were forced out. Behind the door, the violence was quiet. Alfonso was strangled in his bed. The official report listed fever as the cause of death. Lucrezia was shattered. Witnesses spoke of a woman transformed, her gaze hollow, her movements mechanical. The light that had flickered in her during those brief months with Alfonso was gone. She had understood before that she was being used, but now she understood the cost. Her father, the Pope, had permitted the murder. Her brother had delivered it, and no one, not cardinals, not nobles, not the church, had lifted a finger to stop it. Lucrezia wept, but only once, in public, over Alfonso's body. After that, she was still. After Alfonso's death, Rome buzzed with darker rumors, not just about murder, but about incest, obsession, and a child born from sin. Servants whispered of secret visits to Lucrezia's chambers, of Cesare's violent outbursts if another man so much as looked at her, of a mysterious infant, infans Romanus, whose paternity no one dared clarify. One papal bull declared the child was the Pope's, another hinted it was Cesare's. Neither mentioned the mother. In a city where sins were sold like indulgences, even this shocked. Lucrezia stayed silent. What choice did she have? By now, she was a public symbol of scandal, corruption, power. Some saw her as a seductress, others as a victim. Few saw the truth. A woman navigating a world built entirely by men who used her as a tool, then blamed her for bleeding. But she was learning. When it came time for a third marriage, Lucrezia took control. Her suitor, Alfonso d'Este, heir to the powerful Duchy of Ferrara. Unlike before, she didn't wait to be handed over like currency. She negotiated, Dowry, status, autonomy, every term was argued with icy precision. This wasn't a girl anymore. It was a strategist. Rome laughed at her efforts. Ferrara hesitated, but Lucrezia got her deal. And so, at 21, she left the Vatican for good. No longer a pawn, now a player. The departure was more than geographical, it was existential. For the first time, she was out of her father's reach, beyond her brother's violence, and free to build something of her own. But freedom had its cost. Her past would follow her. The rumors, the deaths, the whispered name, Borgia, spoken like a curse. And yet, in Ferrara, she began again. Ferrara was different. Unlike the decadent courts of Rome, where ambition reeked of blood and incense, Ferrara moved with elegance and restraint. And into this world stepped Lucrezia Borgia, no longer the Vatican's golden pawn, but a duchess with a haunted past and a point to prove. Her new family eyed her warily. The name Borgia was a stain, and many in Ferrara feared she would bring scandal to their door. But Lucrezia surprised them. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't loud. She was strategic. In the palaces of Ferrara, she didn't posture for power. She earned it. While her husband, Alfonso d'Este, handled military campaigns, Lucrezia governed in his absence. With calm efficiency, she managed estates, mediated disputes, and even acted as regent, commanding the same respect her name once repelled. She became a patron of the arts. Poets, painters, philosophers, all found welcome at her court. Under her influence, Ferrara flourished into a cultural beacon. But behind the grace, her past lived on. Back in Rome, her father's grip on power was slipping. Pope Alexander VI had overreached. Cesare, though still ruthless, was losing control over his territories. The Vatican's enemies were closing in, and as the Borgia Empire began to unravel, Lucrezia stayed silent. She wrote no public letters of support, sent no troops, offered no aid. Her silence spoke volumes. She had learned well. Sometimes survival meant walking away from the fire and letting it consume itself. Yet, the past couldn't be erased. No matter how gracefully she ruled or how generously she patronized the arts, the name Lucrezia Borgia still turned heads, still sparked whispers of poison rings, secret births, and papal orgies. She wore the rumors like armor, never denying, never defending, just moving forward. Because in Ferrara, for the first time in her life, she was building something not for her father, not for Cesare, but for herself. As Rome collapsed under its own weight, Lucrezia thrived. Her court in Ferrara became one of the most admired in Italy, refined, efficient, intellectually alive. She corresponded with poets and philosophers, funded chapels and schools, and became a symbol of grace under shadow. But she never forgot what it cost to get there. In public, she moved with calm authority. In private, she was more reserved. Ferrara gave her space, but it didn't erase her past. The tragedies she had lived through had marked her too deeply. She had seen what power did when unchecked. She had seen it dressed in robes and seated on a throne. Her family had taught her everything, through betrayal, through control, through silence. Still, she built. During Alfonso's absences, she governed with precision. Taxes were collected fairly. Roads were maintained. Order held. Her leadership won over even the harshest skeptics. Nobles who once doubted her now deferred to her judgment. Ambassadors wrote home not about a scandalous duchess, but about a capable ruler. And yet, Ferrara's acceptance came with conditions. She could be useful. She could be elegant. But she could never forget that she was still a Borgia. So, she didn't try to erase it. Instead, She controlled the narrative. She never spoke publicly of her first 2 marriages. She never corrected the rumors, but neither did she indulge them. In Ferrara, she wasn't just rebuilding a life, she was rewriting her legacy. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, died in 1503. Poison, said some. Divine justice, said others. Cesare fell not long after, captured, exiled, broken. The Borgia name, once synonymous with terror, began to fade. Lucrezia didn't mourn publicly. She didn't return to Rome. She stayed in Ferrara, where the whispers still followed her, but no longer defined her. She had outlived the men who controlled her. Now she would outlast their story. In the years that followed, Lucrezia Borgia became something few expected, a symbol of order. Her rule in Ferrara deepened. She invested in monasteries, encouraged agricultural reforms, and built networks of influence beyond Italy. Her court attracted scholars and artists who found in her not just a benefactor, but a protector. To them, she wasn't a Borgia, she was a woman of vision. She had children, some survived, some didn't. She grieved them privately. Her husband, Alfonso d'Este, often traveled for military or political purposes, leaving her with full authority. She governed not as a consort, but as a sovereign. Legal disputes, infrastructure decisions, court appointments, nothing moved without her word. She had become what the Vatican never allowed her to be, powerful on her own terms. Still, some wounds never healed. She carried them quietly. In her letters, there's a recurring tone of restraint, measured, deliberate, never too intimate. She had learned that even trust could be a weapon, and she had learned to survive without it. She turned to religion, not as a mask, but as structure. Her later years were marked by increasing devotion, but this was no retreat. It was a way of shaping her final legacy. She commissioned religious works, oversaw hospitals, funded convents. Behind every donation, every foundation, was a clear purpose: to leave behind something cleaner than what she came from. Her transformation wasn't dramatic. It was calculated, gradual, real. She never renounced her past, but she buried it beneath layers of service and silence. The Ferrara nobility, once suspicious, grew to respect her. Foreign diplomats wrote of her intelligence. Local citizens spoke of her fairness. She had outmaneuvered not just political enemies, but history itself. But time has a way of reclaiming even the strongest. And Lucrezia's body, worn by childbirth, grief, and decades of tightly wound survival, was beginning to fail. By her late 30s, Lucrezia's body bore the quiet cost of survival. Multiple pregnancies, several miscarriages, relentless pressure, all had taken their toll. Her health began to falter, but she didn't slow down. Even as her strength faded, her influence only grew. In Ferrara, she remained an anchor of stability. When her husband was away, few questioned her authority. Even when he returned, Alfonso relied on her judgment in matters of governance. Behind palace walls, she had become essential. She continued to support religious foundations. She attended Mass regularly, fasted with discipline, and surrounded herself with scholars and clerics. Some saw in her a genuine transformation, a woman turning toward faith after a lifetime of shadows. Others saw strategy, a final move to shape memory before it was too late. But even if it was both, it didn't make it any less real. By 1519, Lucrezia was 39. That year, she became pregnant again. The pregnancy was hard, complicated from the beginning. Her body, already worn thin, could not bear the strain. She gave birth to a stillborn daughter. Days later, Lucrezia developed complications: fevers, bleeding, pain that came in waves. Her physicians did what they could, but everyone, especially Lucrezia, knew she was dying. There were no final speeches, no poetic parting words, just silence, prayer, and the dull, creeping awareness that her story was ending. She died on June 24th, 1519. Her body was placed in the convent of Corpus Domini, buried without grandeur. No parade, no trumpet, no spectacle, just stone, just earth. She had spent her life surviving the games of men more powerful, more dangerous, more cruel. And in the end, she left behind not a scandal, but a legacy. A woman misused, a woman reborn. Lucrezia Borgia's name didn't rest with her bones. For centuries after her death, the myths flourished. She was cast as a poisoner, a seductress, a conspirator, painted by historians and playwrights as the black heart of the Borgia legacy. Few paused to ask, was any of it true? They remembered the scandals, the rumors, the whispers of incest and murder. They remembered the Vatican orgies, the poisoned rings, the mysterious children. They remembered the sins of her father and brother and pinned them to her dress. They didn't remember the girl sold into marriage at 13, or the teenager forced to prove her virginity before strangers, or the wife who cradled a dying husband knowing her own brother had ordered the killing, or the woman who rebuilt a life out of ashes and silence. They didn't remember Ferrara's Duchess, the patron of hospitals and artists, the capable regent, the quiet reformer, because the truth was inconvenient and myth was easier, but history, slowly, is learning. Modern scholars have re-examined her letters, her policies, her patronage. They've begun to peel back the layers of legend and found someone far more complex than the villain she was made out to be. Someone strategic, intelligent, tragic, and fiercely human. Lucrezia Borgia lived in a world that weaponized women's bodies and silenced their voices. She endured that world, and somehow she left it better than she found it. She wasn't the monster. She was the mirror, reflecting the very corruption that created her. And she didn't need revenge. She had something more powerful, a legacy that outlived the lies.